Hello everyone. The light at the end of the tunnel that everyone quite possibly will see did not appear accidentally. The fact that it exists was acknowledged repeatedly by many of those who miraculously returned from another world. British reanimatologist Sam Guy, after hearing those stories about near-death experiences, organized a research project to confirm or deny the patient's stories. No patient would describe or mention the symbols he left on the upper shelf in the operating room that could be seen only from above, as they told to be hovering above their own bodies while being reanimated. Thus the medic nearly was convinced that the transition of consciousness into another world is just a legend when, however, one of the patients still managed to prove that he had been to another world. The man reported that he had been watching the intensive care manipulations for several minutes hovering above his own body. The doctor was convinced of the sincerity of his words when the patient described in detail each action of the doctors, knowing that after heart failure a man's brain simply could not work or perceive the reality. Dr. Guy was convinced that consciousness is really the ability to live separate from the body. The famous psychiatrist Andrei Nezdilov, who created the first hospice in Russia, spent many years communicating with dying patients and came to the conclusion that a person's consciousness does not die with the body, and as proof, the doctor cites a story in which he himself became a participant. One of his patients outlived a cardiac arrest. The reanimatologist doctors were unable to revive her for a long time. After the miraculous rescue, he visited that girl and she told him that after losing consciousness some force pushed her out of her own body and she was able to look at herself from the outside. The patient reported that in the transitional state she remembered her mother and daughter and immediately moved to her house to say goodbye to them. The girl saw her child was playing with a doll and her mother met a neighbor who had brought a polka dot dress. On the same day, the doctor visited the patient's family and told them her words. It turned out that the girl's story was true to the smallest detail. Many of you can also share your own experience or a story, and we shall be glad to read it here in our channel. There are some more stories from people about unusual and even mystical cases in their life.
I experienced the clinical death. I want to tell those who want to know if there is life there. Yes. There it is, sunny, warm, beautiful and calm, and yes, your loving, departed person, your angel in life, will meet you there. It's incredibly beautiful and calm there, and we'll be there with our family.
My mother recently died. She died in agony while lying in the hospital. We were not allowed to say goodbye. How much I regret about many things, that I did not pay attention to her, that I was not kind to her. Only now I understand how wonderful she was in life. She never offended anyone in her life. How hardworking she was. God give her all the best in heaven. May her soul be at peace. Mom, I never told you how much I love you. Mom, I will always love you.
When I was studying at the college, our teacher told me that in his youth he experienced clinical death after an accident. He said that he also saw everything that was in the room and himself from above, and then there was a flight through a dark tunnel, at the end of which there was white light. And when he reached the very end of this tunnel, he saw his dead grandmother. She smiled at him and said, "Alex, it's too early for you to come here." And after that he came to his senses.
In 2018, my father died. At the time of his death at night, at a distance of 100 kilometers, I heard his voice, just like when I was a child and we lived in the same place. He woke me up. In the dream, it seemed to me that it was my imagination, but in the morning the doctor called and said that Dad was no longer there. After the funeral and 40 days, I felt his presence everywhere and in everything. This is such a bright, living, and clear feeling that you don't see his essence but perceive him as alive. When I arrived at the cemetery to see him, my car alarm went on, the shock sensor on the car was turned off to a minimum. This continued every time I visited up to 40 days. Then it all ended, but he is nearby, I know it.
A few years ago, my father-in-law died. He was already nearly 90 years old. His wife was left alone and missed and cried for him very much, since they had lived together for many years. And then one day we came to her house, and she said that her grandfather came to her at night and told her not to cry. That everything was fine with him there, as soon as he would get an apartment, he will take her with him. After this conversation I got goosebumps. A couple of months later, my mother-in-law died. My husband and I went to the cemetery to see the burial site. I wanted them to be nearby, but there was no place nearby, there were many fresh graves. And then the cemetery caretaker said, "I don't know if you can say that you were lucky in this case, but there is a free grave at your grandfather's feet, and you can bury your relative here." We immediately remembered our grandfather, who was waiting for an apartment for his wife. That's how they lie next to each other. How to evaluate all this? I believe that there is an afterlife. I also wanted to add that my husband's parents both died in his presence. When he opened the window in the morning, at that moment his father took his last breath, and then his mother. It was as if the soul was flying out of the body and flying out of the room out the window.
I had one operation, then it turned out to be another. The operation was long. The anesthesiologist told me afterwards they were losing me and he prayed for me. They pulled me out. I didn't see the tunnels, I didn't fly over my body. I ended up in a large room where there was a lot of light. There's nothing like that here. I felt surprisingly calm and good there, as if I returned home. I didn't want to leave at all, but one might say, was pushed out. I woke up in intensive care, with an anesthesiologist nearby. A lot of interesting things also happened there, because when I woke up, I had one thought: I need to remember everything well to tell everyone. I dozed off for a while, woke up and that's it. I didn't remember anything, just a lot of light, absolute peace in my soul, and that I was pushed out here.
At the cemetery, when I was visiting my dad, I once felt his presence right next to me. I felt right in my skin that he was nearby. And then I asked him to give me some kind of sign if it was him and he was really nearby. And literally a couple of seconds later a bird pooped on my head. By the way, my dad was a great joker during his lifetime. Grandmother sent me a photo from another world. So they see everything there? It happened a week ago. Grandmother died several years ago. How it happened, while she was still alive, she gave me and my mother a photo. And she asked that it had to be on the monument. She was really looking forward to death. She was literally preparing. She was 82. She was preparing vigorously, bought clothes and kept waiting. And on December 31st, her wish came true. And so, I need to order a monument, but the photo disappeared. We searched for it for several years and searched everything. Then we decided to take any other photo. We found a similar one. And so, we agreed to go, accept the job and pay the rest of the payment for the monument. Everything was ready there. Even though the photo was not the same. I was waiting for my mother at the entrance of the house. She was home alone. She came out and her hair stood on end. While she was pouring tea into the thermos, there was a loud bang in the corridor. She went out to look and an envelope appeared on the table. She thinks, what kind of envelope is this? She opened it, and there was that photo that we had been looking for several years. Where did it come from? And precisely at the moment when we went to accept monument. I also had some kind of explosion in the air at work, like a light bulb burst, but everything was turned off. Briefly speaking, they probably see us there, since they even throw material things at us. The photo was taken a month before I was born. I read it on the back.
More than 30 years ago, after a serious operation, I experienced the clinical death. I was flying in a dark tunnel towards a bright but not blinding light. I felt my body as usual. The closer I flew to the light, the more understanding of all things I felt. At the same time, I understood that if I crossed the border of the world, I would never come back. Then it was as if I was dragged back, and I woke up in a hospital bed. The feeling of knowing everything disappeared. But then I developed abnormal abilities that I wish I didn't have, and I also regretted that I did not fly over the border of light in the tunnel, because I had never experienced such peace and happiness.
There is something in this. I couldn't believe that this was true, life after death. But when my younger brother died, and that day my husband took me to the maternity hospital, I didn't see my brother off on his last journey. Later I saw him in my dream. He was sitting in a suit on the bench in white socks and long trousers tucked into socks. I cried, hugged him, and asked why was he sitting there. He replied that the parents buried him without shoes, everyone was playing and dancing, but he was barefoot. I could barely wait until morning to ask my mom how it was. It turned out that they forgot to put his shoes on, because everyone was in shock from the loss. He was 15 years old at that time.
My grandson was in a coma after the accident. We stayed close for a month. After a blood transfusion, he began to choke, although the blood type coincided with the donor's, but the elements did not combine. He was transferred to intensive care. The relatives were sent home. At 9 in the morning I heard his voice. "Let me go, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, a useless vegetable. But in 4 months I will return to my family. I'll come to my sister." It was at 9 in the morning. When we called the hospital, we were told that the boy had died at exactly 9 in the morning. And 4 months later, his sister announced her pregnancy. Although before that she had an ovary removed. A girl was born with a huge hematoma on her head and abrasions on her body in the same places that my deceased grandson had. So we have to understand that it is very important to find those precious minutes of life in every day, that is the opportunity to call your mom, the opportunity to hug your mom, your sister and brother, any loved one, to tell you love them so much. Because one day no one will pick up the phone on the other end of the line. That's all for today. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell not to miss our new videos. Bye bye.